Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're going to be on the Shadowlands Prepatch PTR. Going to be making up a tier list for dueling other classes as a Frost DK here in the Prepatch. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you guys where they're going to be and put them at specific rankings, and then kind of give you an explanation on why these classes versus a Frost DK is at these rankings. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. Alright, so let's go ahead and start classifying where these classes go, because obviously the first class that we're going to have to start off with on this list, and obviously the most important, is going to be Frost Death Knight. So let's go ahead and put Frost Death Knight in the classification they need to be in. So we've decided, and it's not only me deciding this list, out of the dual pits, there are, I'd say, about 5 Frost DKs I've seen out there that do extraordinarily impressive, and the rest of them are fairly struggling with what's going on currently. But we're going to go ahead and put Frost DKs up into the A tier category because they are fairly strong when it comes to current PTR, but I wouldn't say they're overly strong. They're not going to be up in that S tier rank, and they're going to struggle against a lot of the other stronger classes, but still doable and still winnable in duels. So we've got the Frost DK placed in A tier just for kind of like overall strength. We do okay. Burst, we do pretty well, but where we do lack, obviously, is going to be survivability versus massive burst when it comes to, let's say, versus the A tier or the S tier classes that we're going to be listing up there. As for the second class we're going to be talking about, it is Arcane Mage. Now, Arcane Mage is obviously, if you've dueled one in the past couple years, have insane mobility. Just absolutely mad lad mobility that you can't catch. And as a Frost DK, unless you're running Heartstop and Delirium, the chances of you beating a geared experienced Arcane Mages are almost slim to none. It's almost like the Arcane Mage has to misplay for you to win on a Frost DK to actually make a solid playback versus an Arcane Mage. And not to mention, they actually do have some pretty sick mobile burst in their personal toolkit on the pre-patch. Moving on to rank 3, we are going to be classifying Rep Paladins. Now, Paladins, definitely, a lot of people really enjoy the Retribution Paladins, but on the PTR at the moment, they are definitely an S tier dueler, just for the sheer survivability of the bubbles, being able to obviously immune major cooldowns, immune major damage coming in on them, and they have quite a bit of survivability with those machine gun wings procs popping off. Now, one of the things that make them a very strong competitor in the S tier market, obviously, is just raw burst pressure. Rep Paladins are capable of some of the highest burst pressure in the dueling category of almost any classes, with the exception of a few casters in terms of burst pressure. So obviously Retribution is going to be very high on the tier list versus Frost DKs, just for their overall survivability and burst pressure they're capable of doing. Next on the list, we're going to be talking about Destruction Warlocks. Now these boys can be terrifying at the moment. Now, the majority of Destruction Warlocks you're going to come across feel fairly tame in terms of dueling. We're going to put Destruction not only in S class, but we're going to put Destruction in S class plus. Because if you even give a good solid Destruction Warlock even a minute amount of breathing time and you mess up on your rotation, they can drop you within literal seconds with Chaos Bolts. It is actually insane the amount of pressure they can put out right now in burst pressure. Next up on this list, we've got Fire Mages. Now, Fire Mages are fairly good. They have quite a bit of mobility still, but overall, I think the things that they're lacking is just like longevity, survivability, such as Rep Paladins have. They don't have nearly as much mobility as, let's say, an Arcane Mage to kite out a lot of the classes on this list. So we're going to have to drop Fire Mage down to at least an A tier in comparison to the other classes on this list, because they're not extremely hard to duel. They've got a massive amount of burst, but generally it's fairly easy to tell when that burst is coming. But they do have capabilities of literally 3-shotting classes at times. So we're going to go ahead and put Fire into A tier because they are a bit more controllable, obviously, than Arcane Mages are when it comes to those 1v1 categories. Next up, we've got Sub Rogues. Now, sub-rogues on the PTR is kind of hard to put them where we want them to be, but even without the current bugged healing on PTR that they have with lying in wait, we would have to say that sub-rogues definitely fall into the category of S tier, being that a good sub-rogue can reopen for full heal, live until its secondary cooldowns, and repeat the process over and over again. Pretty strong, I've got to admit. Now, what I'm talking about with the bugged part is lying in wait obviously activates in combat currently and causes a sub-rogue to be tankier than just about any class in the current game, which, kind of puts them in their own S tier category for a bit there. But they are definitely beatable even with the healing bug, but it's definitely a very tough fight. As for the next class, we are going to be talking about Demon Hunters, specifically Havoc. Now, Demon Hunters in the previously patch, before they were nerfed quite a bit, were some of the strongest dueling melee in the game. Probably, in terms of solo dueling skills, definitely S tier. But after their nerfs, we got to put Havoc down in the B tier, dueling Frost DKs. And you're probably wondering, why? Well, obviously, they lost their passive dodge when it came to taking on Frost DKs. A lot of their passive dodge is on their abilities. So, Obliterates tend to deal a lot of burst pressure to Demon Hunters outside of their, let's say, their demonic form. Even in demonic form, you can still apply quite a bit of pressure as a Frost DK. Now, can you still lose to a Demon Hunter on a Frost DK? Definitely. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're kiting out, and you don't know when to time your cooldowns correctly to reduce the damage you're about to take, because, once they fly up in the air, if you don't have any self-healings or planning on it, or, combined runic power at that point, you're going to end up getting dropped pretty hard. So dueling a Demon Hunter, we definitely had to put him down in the B category because we didn't feel like it was anywhere near as strong as some of the other classes' capabilities on these this dueling list and on these dueling tiers. So Demon Hunters definitely got a solid nerf here on the pre-patch when it comes to 1v1s. And I think it was about time. I mean, honestly, the Demon Hunters were overly strong for quite some time, and they had massive amounts of passive healing that you didn't actually have to use passive cooldowns, or passive cooldowns without their healing, obviously, but you didn't even have to focus on healing. Like, it's a class that was that powerful for almost no reason at all. It didn't make a lot of sense in terms of just balancing them that way, since it was deal damage and that damage heals you, and you don't actually have to worry about damage, or you don't have to worry about healing, you don't have to worry about kiting, things along those lines. And it's just very frustrating to a lot of people, but very good to see Demon Hunters being taken down a bit. As for the next tier, we've got Feral Druids. Now, Feral Druids are pretty interesting. The majority of Feral Druids that we dueled, we would have put in B rank, but we did come across a couple Ferals that not only raised up the tier list, but we definitely think quite a bit better of current Ferals on the PTR after dueling some of these people. Now, they have quite a bit of survivability. Their damage is, I'd say, stronger than anything in the B category, but a lot lesser than anything in the S category by far. Their constant heals are fairly good. They can stand toe-to-toe with a lot of classes, surprisingly, and still manage to do quite a bit of pressure, while also still pulling out quite a bit of consistent healing. Alright, moving on to the next class, we got Boomy. Now, Boomy was kind of hard for us. We did want to put Boomy's Druids in the B tier category, but we did see a few that had insane amount of overall survivability. So we're going to do something weird here, and we're going to put balance in between A and B slot, because we feel like this class actually has quite a bit of dueling potential, but we currently haven't seen it here on the PTR, and this is after thousands of duels. They have a massive amount of self-healing capabilities and survivability, but I think where balance actually lacks is going to be consistent pressure when it comes to 1v1 duels. Now, when it comes to BGs or something like that, probably multi-dotting obviously is going to take their damage, to the next level. But when it comes to 1v1, let's say versus a Frost DK, we feel like Boomies definitely are struggling to put out an ample amount of pressure in comparison to Frost, let alone these other classes that are capable of just insane burst pressure. Moving on to the next class, we've got Fury Warrior. Now, Warriors altogether, both of their DPS specs are actually very powerful, like actually really strong, very surprising. Fury, we put in an A S class because Fury is fully capable of beating some of these S class specs in 1v1 categories, but they do lack a little bit, and I'd say overall damage pressure, a little bit of burst pressure there, and they're not as good as, I'll go ahead and just throw up the arms on there just because we're here talking about warriors. They don't deal nearly as much burst pressure as arms. Now, this is one of the first times in a long time that we actually see arms being a better dual spec than Fury. I know, it sounds absolutely crazy. It sounds like I'm a mad lad, but those ignore pain changes that Arms specifically got put Fury in a totally different dueling class, or Arms in a totally different dueling class than it did previously. And you'd be very surprised to see that a solid Arms can definitely beat a solid Fury warrior. And if you take in what kind of damage it is, burst pressure with Immortal Strike, you can definitely see how that's going to fare overall better with a lot of these classes that are hybrids. So Fury Warrior, Arms Warrior, very good dueling classes. Definitely all of them up in S class. We put Fury Warrior between S and A class because we felt like they are a bit more manageable in comparison to the obviously the other S tier classes. All right, moving on to the next class, we've got Unholy DKs. Now, Unholy DKs, very powerful on the pre-patch. They have an insane amount of damage coming off while also sustaining the majority of survivability right now. Now, where do Unholy DKs kind of pull ahead of Frost DKs here on the PTR is their full capability of dealing pressure at range in comparison to, let's say, Frost DKs running at classes and, you know, chasing them down, trying to stay on them. Unholy, on the other side of things, can obviously summon 3 Maguses, go ham, summon a bunch of ghouls, and actually kite out the majority of classes so they can't benefit from, let's say, a Fury Warrior dueling an Unholy DK. He's going to throw up his healing capabilities, and the Unholy DK is going to kite him out while still applying a mad lad amount of pressure on the Fury Warrior. And they also obviously got Gargoyle back and a couple little toys like that, which overall just gives them even more range pressure capabilities. Next up on the list, we have Survival Hunters. Now, Survival Hunters is something that we've came across maybe one solid Survival Hunter that was fully capable of fighting with the S tier classes. And we know in better hands, Survival will be very threatening, especially in the 1v1 categories and being able to kite certain classes. Now, the thing about survivability is against some classes, it's definitely an easier fight than others. Range classes, obviously, are going to have a bit better chance of fighting survival, and anything that can avoid being kited very easily. Now, Frost DKs, I'd say 1v1 category survival is definitely going to take it in the long run, a very solid survival, but the majority of your fights on a Frost DK, you should be able to beat the average survival hunter, considering the majority of survival hunters aren't amazing at kiting and generally kind of play like an arms warrior, so you would feel kind of like survival is less, but I guarantee you on a stacked survival, they're going to be extremely threatening versus a Frost DK. As for the next class, we've got Marksman Hunter. Now, Marksman Hunter does pretty good. They've got quite a bit of CC, but the reason that we're going to have to drop Marksman down into the A tier is because they lack survivability in comparison to other classes. Now, you'd figure, well, survival can kite. Can Marksman kite? They can kite okay, but they kind of lack consistent survivability in comparison to the majority of other classes, and we've found Marksman to be quite a bit more capable of being controlled than, let's say, survivability, and obviously the other classes that are up in the S tier. All right, next up we've got BM. Now, I would have liked to be able to put BM in a higher tier, but the majority of BMs we've dueled on here, we don't feel like BM's very good. At least we never seen it being good. We've never seen it in a, let's say, a good hunter using BM here on the PTR pre-patch. The majority of hunters we see are either playing Marksman or very rarely we'll see it survival. But overall, Beast Mastery doesn't seem to be faring too well in duels, which I could imagine why. Because usually, let's say in a Frost DK Beastmaster 1v1. Frost DK is going to open up on the Beastmaster. They're both going to deal consistent damage on live, and then gradually one of the other two is going to end up overtaking him in the long run. Now here on the PTR, you got to remember, Frost DK gained back a ton of burst pressure, an absolute insane amount of burst pressure in comparison to what we've previously had, which gives us a little bit of a niche, obviously, over Beast Mastery Hunters, consistent pressure, being that we're able to apply burst pressure within the small windows that we're actually able to connect to said Beastmaster Hunter. So next up, we've got prop pallies. Now this is an absolutely insane thing when it comes to prop pallies. Prop pallies are fully capable of fighting multiple targets at once and surviving without fairly any problems, considering they heal based on how much life they're missing. So the more life they're missing, the harder they heal. And when it comes to 1v1s, prop pallies are extremely powerful, especially when we're fighting anything of like the melees. Prop paladins are going to be extremely powerful. I could see casters obviously having a much easier time than the majority of melee classes in terms of 1v1. But yeah, prop paladins I've seen take on multiple classes and just live lord, just absolutely live lord through it. As for the other tanks, we haven't seen many of the other tanks on PTR at all. Like, we've seen people kind of just messing around, but we've never seen people, for the majority of these tank classes, actually take, duels seriously and be a, let's say, much higher rated PvPer on the majority of other tank classes, which is kind of sad to see, but, I mean, overall, it is what it is. As for Windwalkers, for the 1v1 dueling category, Windwalkers are going to go up in the S tier. We have a lot of S tier classes at the moment. We have a lot of very, very strong dueling classes with a lot of capability to deal quite a bit of DPS and obviously quite a bit of burst when it comes to just dueling 1v1. And of course, they have a massive amount of control. I'd say the thing that's obviously going to make Windwalker S tier is the kiting survivability. Obviously, if you throw in something like Pillar or something along those lines, the overall strength of Windwalker is going to be kicked up quite a bit. And in terms of a Frost DK versus Windwalker, a Windwalker should out-heal a Frost DK in the long run. But I've got to admit, like, dueling a Windwalker on a Frost DK right now with this overall burst pressure feels a heck of a lot better than it used to. Like, day and night different. Next up, we have Outlaw Rogues. Now, Outlaw Rogues, we've seen an okay amount on here, but the majority of people are definitely going to be playing either Assassination or Sub. Obviously, we talked about, like where, we got them Sub Rogues with an insane amount of consistent healing because of bug. And, of course, we've got Assassination Rogues, which just kind of hide in the shadows, deal damage, and kite out, which ends up being an overall better playstyle for dueling than current Outlaw Rogue. So we might as well also throw Assassination where it should be. Now, Assassination was kind of a hard one for us, but we definitely found that it could go in the A tier. And the reason that we're putting Assassination in the A tier is because it is quite a bit more controllable than the majority of classes that are up in the S tier categories, but at the same time, still stronger than the classes down in the B tier category. Next up, we've got, we already did Destro. Yeah, we already put Destruction up there. It's on my list. Next up, we got Affliction. Now, Affliction's kind of like a new monster in comparison to what it used to be. We're going to go ahead and put Affliction right on top of Destruction up here. We're just going to put those two together. Now, Affliction surprisingly has an insane amount of survivability and a massive amount of burst with their new capabilities of being able to deal burst pressure. I believe it's like Doom Bolt. So they duel you, they apply full dots, and then they hit you with a Doom Bolt for about 12 to 13k, which is roughly a little bit more than 50% of your health. So you can imagine at that point, just the overall burst pressure of the dots being on you, and then of course throwing up life drain is extremely powerful because they're going to throw up the ability to make it so they're uninterruptible. Very strong. Affliction has very strong dueling mechanics and is definitely S-class tier when it comes to 1v1 scenarios. Next up, we got Ellie Shaman. Now, Ellie is just Shamans overall were very, very rare unless we're talking about Resto here on the PTR. We did see a massive amount of restorations running around quite a bit. But yeah, when it comes to Ellie Shamans, we're going to have to throw Ellie Shaman into A tier. As we know, Ellie can be played quite a bit better than we saw here on the PTR. But overall, we got to say they're not nearly as bursty, nor I'm not going to say they have nearly as much survivability as a lot of these classes up in these the up S tier rank. As for enhancement, now enhancement, it kind of goes, at least in my opinion, enhancement can go, I'm going to put enhancement between B and A tier, because I feel like enhancement can do pretty well in terms of survivability, but I feel like in overall burst pressure, they're definitely lacking in that category compared to the majority of other classes in the A tier, and of course the majority of classes up in the S tier. So we're going to throw enhancement into the AB class, because they are lacking a bit, like I said, in the burst pressure. Now the rest we've got Demonology Warlocks, which I'm pretty sure I have that on my list. Hold on, let me look here. I'm pretty sure we went over Demo. Yeah, we did. Now, Demonology Warlock. Now, here's the thing with Warlocks right now, guys. There isn't a bad spec for Warlocks right now. There literally isn't. Any of the three, when it comes to dueling, are definitely S-class tier dueling classes. Like, the Warlocks right now are just absolutely beast mode here on the PTR in comparison to the majority of other classes. Now, where are we going to put the rest of these guys at? We've got, oh yeah, Frost Mage. I almost forgot. Like, I actually almost forgot. I don't even think I put Frost Mage on my list, but we definitely talked about it. And we just couldn't make Frost Mage S tier. Frost Mage, at least to Frost DKs, felt very controllable. And we felt like they had a lot less burst than they previously had. We felt like they got their wings clipped off a little bit when it comes to the 1v1 category in comparison to, let's say, Arcane Mage or Fire Mage. So I'm going to go ahead and throw Frost Mages down in the AB class, because I did feel like we had a bit more leeway in terms of fighting and dueling. Now, I definitely, during this list, I could have used, these bottom tiers a little bit better, spread out the classes a little bit, but I didn't feel like there was big enough gaps between them that I needed to spread out the majority of these classes into those tiers. I felt like they were much closer together than a lot of people would think, considering a lot of these A classes are still fully capable of beating S classes. Like, let's say I want to use my Frost DK as an example. Now, where's Shadow Priest? Like, I didn't even put Shadow Priest on there, which is surprisingly, and it's one of the first on my list. That doesn't even make any sense at all. Shadow Priest obviously is S tier after all the reworks that they've had. I don't know where I'm going to, hold on. I'll just kind of slide this over here with Windwalker. Shadow Priests are absolutely insane when it comes to 1v1ings. Now, their dot damage is threatening. It's scary, but it's not like insane burst pressure. Now, what makes them scary is their overall survivability, because there's very few classes, I'd say, that are up on that S tier rank that have the healing capabilities of, let's say, Shadow Priest, because I mean, they're closer to being like, Shadow Holy Priest going up there. Like, that survivability is absolutely insane. And let's say you're playing a Frost DK, you have to play 100% correct to even have a chance of being a high-rated Shadow Priest in a 1v1. Like, you have to play flawless. I don't know why, but Shadow Priests right now, they are tanky, very tanky. I'd even put them as tanky as a tank in some cases. Like, really wild how strong they can be. As for Blood DKs, I wasn't very impressed with them. And I didn't really know how to rank a Blood DK. But in terms of damage pressure and survivability, they're nowhere near good as, let's say, a Prop Paladin. So I'm kind of just going to go ahead and throw Blood down in this B dueling category just for the lulz, because I really don't feel like it's going to be very competitive in terms of 1v1ing other classes currently on the PTR. But obviously, they most likely have some survival avenues that they could take that they could last a bit longer. But I don't know if they've been overly nerfed or what it is. But they're just not that great here on the PTR. As for Prot Warriors, again, not that great. Actually, I might even put them lower. I might put some of these tanks down in the C category. Blood, you're going down too. You're going to the C category. So yeah, we're definitely going to move Prot Warriors and Blood DKs down to the C category, because I feel like they've just kind of been nerfed beyond what they should be. Brewmaster Monks, you're going down there too, because I literally didn't see any Brewmaster Monks out there at all, which kind of unfair, but still, we haven't seen any of them. As for Vengeance Demon Hunters, we didn't see it end very well for Vengeance Demon Hunters on the PTR. Like, they definitely weren't very impressive in comparison to the majority of other classes. As for healers, actually, wait, we almost forgot Guardian Druid. Yeah, Guardian Druids got nerfed, and overall their survivability at a certain point starts dropping off. And the majority of nuke classes, like up in the S tier, have enough burst pressure to actually threaten Guardian Druids quite a bit. Now, as we know, Guardian Druids, before they were nerfed, were absolutely monsters, but afterwards, not so much. And in terms of healers, unless you're dueling on a healer, we're gonna throw all the healers down here in F class. Like, get out of here. You shouldn't be dueling if you're a healer. The class is designed to 2v1. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and chuck all of these healing classes down into F rank. You know, I wouldn't actually know where healers currently stand in terms of dueling. Probably pretty high in 1v1s. Like, they could probably outlast the majority of classes, and classes like, let's say, Disc Priest could probably deal quite a bit of DPS pressure, while still obviously not dying to the majority of classes. But obviously, no one's going to look at healers and be like, man, you're a good dueler on a healer. I mean, you're designed to 2v1. There's not much leeway you can say about the class past that. But that's kind of, I'd say, the dueling class tier list here on the PTR. What classes are overly strong, what classes are a bit easier on the dueling side in comparison to other ones. But there are surprisingly a lot of classes that are up in that S tier rank that are absolutely destructive and threatening no matter how you look at it. And you either have to play your Frost DK 100% right, or you're going to end up 100% losing. So hope you guys again enjoyed this video. I want to kind of give you guys a idea of Frost strength in comparison to a lot of the other classes, and kind of give you guys a list of what's going on. So leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want to see some more content from, you know, the Frost DKs over here, the Frost DKs. And until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.